Good afternoon and welcome to Music Biz Buzz, your source for all things music industry, only here on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University. I'm your host, Katie Egan, and today I am joined with Randy Nichols, current founder and president of Force Media Management, located just a few miles outside our studios in Hempstead in Long Beach, New York. A Long Island native, Nichols launched Force Media Management in 2002, which later merged with Red Light Management Group in 2005. There, Nichols launched the New York office and became vice president of artist management for the company. Red Light is home to artists such as the Dave Matthews Band, Fish, and Luke Bryan. As of 2011, he relaunched Force Media Management Group as its own company, where he now represents bands such as Underoath, The Almost, Starting Line Rock, and Vacationer. With over 20 years of experience, he has tackled the ever-changing style of the music industry, especially in keeping his artists afloat during a global pandemic. He's here to talk to us today about the history of his career and a little bit about his creative approach during the current state of the music industry. Randy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It's funny hearing an intro of yourself, but yeah, sounds good. You did a good job making me sound like I know something.
Thank you. So why don't you first tell us a little bit about yourself? Like said before, you're a Long Island native. Tell us how you got interested in the music scene. Was being close to New York kind of an inspiration for you?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's funny talking to WRHU because early on in my days of like discovering and learning music, I used to listen to RHU probably back when I was in high school initially, and then for college, I went to the other big college in the area, which is CW Post. And at CW Post, I ended up being on the radio station for a while there on WCWP and promoting shows. So I was running their concert committee for several years. And that was really where I kind of first got my taste for the music business. And through that concert committee that I was on at CW Post, I had a handful of friends who ended up having careers in the music industry and were interning for different companies and working for different companies in the business. And that's what really, opened my eyes in a larger scale that this was something I could do in the business.
Really nice. I didn't know you were a college radio alum. Great to have somebody on the call here. Nice to hear you listen to WRHU as well. I remember first meeting you at Hofstra's Music Industry Conference, and you said you started out really young with a young entrepreneurial mindset as a young child. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about this mindset? How did you develop it?
Oh my God. Yeah. So as a kid, I just always, I don't know, I just always like was drawn to business in general. I didn't even remember that I had this conversation with you or what I talked about, but there's two examples that I'll remember. One is a great one just because it snowed yesterday, but as a kid at probably like 10 or 12 years old, I was like watching it snowing and people needed, to get their snow removed. And I'm like, all right, I could shovel snow, make enough money shoveling a few houses to then buy a snowblower. So rather than being a kid at like 10 years old and pocketing that money I made, I was like, all right, I could build a business into this. And I took that money that I made shoveling snow to buy a snowblower so that I could remove even more snow and make even more money. And I also ended up doing a deal with a relative of mine at that time to loan me some of the remaining money I needed for that snowblower, and I would clear their snow for free in exchange to get myself in business faster. So like that's just the kind of mindset I had. And in sixth grade, I remember I found like some new kind of lollipop had come out that like they were selling in the candy stores in town, and everyone loved it. So I went around town and I bought the supply from every store and then brought them all to school in my backpack and was selling candy to all my friends in school as candies that I bought for 10 cents a piece for a quarter. And typically I stopped selling them every day when I had so many quarters in my pockets that my pants were falling down and I needed to stop so I didn't lose my pants.
I think that was the conversation we had. I loved that story about the candy and I wanted you to explain it because I don't know. I mean, how old were you then?
I was in sixth grade, so however old you are then. It's amazing. I've told that story so few times in my life. It's amazing that for whatever reason that came out when we were speaking in the past.
I remember it. So I think it's Fair to say that your young and driven spirit continued into your teenage and young adult years. So, what were some of your first jobs and internships?
Um, that's a good question. Oh yeah, so one of my early internships was again like radio in Long Island. I interned at WLIR, just answering the listener phone lines, and just I just wanted exposure to radio at that point in time. And LIR, which I don't know if anyone, the listeners know about it anymore, but there was a great documentary on Showtime about it last year. It was a really important radio station in the Long Island area, but even nationally, they were the first station to introduce the world to countless bands from like U2 to the Police to countless bands through the 80s and into the early 90s. They were just a forward thinking station. So that was my one of my very first exposure to the industry. But in addition to that, I had interned at a record label, which was a division of Sony Music. I'd interned for a management company. And then one of the last pieces of the puzzle that I felt was I was at radio, was at, all these other areas. You didn't have streaming or any of these other technologies yet. The only other piece of the puzzle that was missing that I didn't have experience with back then was booking. And I wanted to get an internship at a booking agency, and I literally opened up the Polestar guide to booking, which had all the agencies listed in it. And I started at the letter A and just started calling everyone, and somehow ended up getting hired for an internship at a company called Artist and Audience. So I didn't get too far into the book, thankfully. And I started there as an intern, was quickly hired as an assistant, and within like 18 months became an agent and had signed a band called Real Big Fish, which was one of my bigger clients, which was a really popular band in that moment that had a hit single and gold record. And that was kind of like my path on to having, somewhat of a legitimate career in this business.
Nice. So, what did you learn through these early jobs and early internships? Were there any lessons or things you learned on the job that you still carry with you today?
Yeah, there was an interesting thing at my internship at Sony Music where one of my like bosses at the time said something that was sarcastic for sure, but simultaneously was good advice that I've kept with myself to this day. And one of the assistants said to another one of them, like, be nice to Randy. He's going to be our boss one day. And, in some ways it was a compliment because they knew I was really good at what I was doing, but it was a lesson that I learned instantly, which is you never know who your boss is going to be in any given moment. You never know how the structure of things are going to change. And you've got to treat people right because everybody has a course in this business where, you have rises and falls and there's just ebbs and flows in a long career in this business. And if you treat people right, when you have one of those, falls in your business, there's going to be people there who want to help prop you up. If you're just not a good person, people just all step back and watch you collapse. So there's just something to be said for just doing the right thing and looking out for people. And I learned that early on. It was literally my first internship I ever had.
For sure. I mean, we hear the phrase all the time. It's not about what you know in the music industry; it's about who you know. So I think what you're saying definitely goes along with
By the
that.
way, yeah, I don't mean to talk over you, but I have a little tidbit on that who you know that I think is really important that people forget. It's not so much who you know, it's who knows you.
Mm,
Because you can know lots of people, but if you walk up to them and you say hello and they don't remember who you are, it does you no good.
true. We talked a lot about a young entrepreneurial mindset. How young can someone start as an artist manager? Are there any barriers to entry?
It's an interesting business because there's literally no barriers to entry. And it's one of the frustrations in being someone who's been doing this now for 20 years is someone who could be 15 years old can just pop up and talk to a band and tell them whatever they want to hear and may have just as good of success signing that act as I can. But that said, I don't like to take anything away from those super young entrepreneurs because there's there's a lot of value in someone who isn't jaded by the years of the business and isn't, stuck in typical mindsets of how we think the business should run. And one of the great things about entertainment is you need fresh new mindsets. So there's something to be said for that young, fresh voice, but at the same time, it's frustrating to be competing with people who also may not know what the hell they're doing, but just simply tell people what they want to hear. So it's a fine line, but you can get into it at any point. But the one thing that I'll point out though about management is I view the role of a manager as the CEO of a corporation. The band are similar to the board of directors, and the manager is the CEO running that corporation for the band. And you need to have some level of a knowledge base about that business to come in there. So, like in any industry, starting as the CEO just isn't a good idea. But there's always exceptions as well.
Hmm. Let's talk about the two artist management groups you worked for. What was your inspiration behind launching Force Media Management?
So my inspiration behind Force Media Management initially was simply like I started my career as an agent, and the agency I was at fell apart, and I needed to create, a business, a career. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I had one of my clients that I was an agent for, and I called them to let them know I was no longer going to be an agent. The agency fell apart, and the artist told me, "Well, now you're the manager." I didn't even like think like I'm starting a management company. I knew I needed to do something, and I was trying to find that path. But this guy named Cooley Ranks, who was the singer of a band called the Pilfers, was this Jamaican guy who was probably like 15 years older than me, or maybe 10 years older than me. It felt like he was so much older than me at the time, and I was just a young kid. And he was always treated me great, but like at the same time, it's like intimidating to be a young man, a young agent, I should say, first, and like your clients are much older than you. But he just pretty much told me, he goes, "Now you're the manager," and that's kind of how it started initially, which is really weird, but it worked out well. And then years later, I've run into him, and he's seen how successful I am. He's like, "I told you you're a manager," and like he takes credit for it, but you know, oddly, he deserves credit for it because I wasn't even looking to be a manager. I was told I'm a manager, and that's kind of how that path kind of began. And as for Force Media Management, like that, I was actually a different management company that I don't even talk about anymore much. But I later went to work at a record company called Sire Records, where I had my management company on the side, and I was there for a little while, and that company collapsed. There's a lot of companies that collapse in the music business. It was kind of a victim of the AOL Time Warner merger. They shut down a bunch of labels and laid off a ton of people. And this was right around 9/11. And I was left in a moment where, in New York especially, it just felt weird and like wrong to call people and look for work.
Mm.
I needed to do something. And a friend of mine that owned a record label called WRHU Records came to me and asked if I was interested in starting a management company with them. And I wasn't sure whether I wanted to. There were pros and cons of doing it, but I reached a point where like I felt like I couldn't find a job. I knew how to do the work. And again, it was kind of someone else telling me I'm a manager. It was my friends who ran this record company who wanted me to start a management division, and I kind of didn't know what else to do, so I became a manager. And I've been from that point forward, I've been a full-time manager since the end of 2001. But again, someone else telling me to do it. So I don't know. I don't know what that says about me.
Well, I think that's a really interesting take, and it kind of leads right into my next question. So yours was a very interesting situation where someone was like, "You're the manager now." But I think in discussions we've had before, I've read that starting to manage an artist can be as simple as just going up to the band saying, "You're a fan, I'm passionate about your music, I could see us working and growing together." And then on the other hand, it's more like lengthy contracts, more paperwork involved. So besides that one instance, what's your approach to starting to manage a band?
I look at management like it's like a marriage. It's a relationship where, if you see someone that you're attracted to, and like you you want to get to know them better. You don't want to marry them instantly. And, I view management in a similar fashion where, I may hear a band that's great, but then that next step is talking to them, getting to know them, what's their desires for their business, how do they look at their music for the future, and what do they want in help in growing their career, and all those pieces are really important when you're approaching a band, because you can love a band but be the absolute wrong manager for them. And I've also had this scenario where you work with someone for a long period of time and they change and you're not a good fit anymore. And there was one artist I managed. I managed a band called Say Anything for a long time, and I had an amazing run with them, but it was time for us to part ways. And like the main guy in that band, he and I still have a great relationship with each other, but the partnership just didn't make sense anymore. And you again, making that analogy to marriages, you sometimes hear people like, you know what, we didn't belong together, but we still care for each other. And that same thing happens in management. It needs to be the right partnership. And I think it's important for people to realize that some of these relationships will last forever and some won't. And you can't be bitter and angry when they don't, because life happens.
What was the reasoning? I'm just kind of curious.
No, it's an interesting one with that. And I have other examples which are more business focused. But in this scenario, the singer had major mental health issues. He was in and out of hospitals, was hospitalized long term early on when I was managing him. So a lot of when I first started managing him, I was dealing with his family and trying to help contain somebody who was collapsing but had brilliant music. And as I helped him, in getting his career and life together, part of that process really became him needing to rebuild a life on his own to be able to stand on his own. And through that, it meant that the guy who helped prop him up and work with his family to keep him together needed to step aside to allow him to be stronger and run his own life. And it was hard because I care about him. I loved his music, but it was really important to his long-term health to build his own team around him that wasn't involved with his family.
Hmm. Interesting. After Force Media Management was launched in 2002, you merged with Red Light Management Group in 2005. What was the thought process behind merging these two companies together?
Yeah, so the thought process behind that was I was kind of a smaller independent manager, a much younger manager at that point in time too, and it was difficult at times to get people to take me seriously. And even my own artists at times, I had one of my artists in particular who really forced my hand to join a bigger management company because they felt that I couldn't get what they wanted done for their career if I didn't have a bigger team behind me. So that kind of drove me initially, and the band kind of pushed my hand to do it, but at the same time I thought there was value in everything they were saying. It wasn't something where I disagreed with them. And unfortunately, for various reasons, I don't feel the partnership worked as well as it could have with Red Light. But it was a smart move to try. And by the end of it, the artist agreed that it was time to move on and not be a part of that system at that company. But it was a logical thing to try at the time.
And now, were those artists the same artists you represented in Force Media Management, or did you go on to represent more artists once you got on Red Light?
Yeah, I brought the majority of my artist roster. I should say I brought all of my artist roster with me.
Hmm.
And when I was there, I added to it. And when I left, I took all my clients with me again.
And so, who were some of the other artists that you got to work with at Red Light?
I worked with an artist called at Red Light. Say Anything was the band that I signed while I was there. So I actually signed them while I was there and stopped working with them while I was there. Other than that, no new artists while I was there, just some spin-offs of existing projects,
Mm.
as far as I remember it now. As time goes on, I almost forget like what era were these artists with me? Was it at this company or that company? Because at the end of the day, it's so much of a personal relationship, and being a part of the bigger company meant I had people to turn to get advice on things or maybe make a phone call to help with something. But the core job of what I was doing didn't change in any way, whether I was at a bigger company or not.
So going along with that core job, can you outline for our listeners what are some of the basic roles and responsibilities of an artist manager?
As I said earlier in our conversation, artist manager, you kind of look at it as like the CEO of the corporation. But within music, there's different divisions that CEO is overseeing. And live events would be one part of that. And, within live events, that's touring, although right now, during COVID times, that's live streams as well. But live events, typically that vertical is run by a booking agent. Then you have music publishing, where on that side you may have a publishing deal, or you may just be working directly with companies who are doing syncs for various song placements. So that would be another vertical. Merchandise is another vertical where you'll hopefully have a merch company or someone in the band who's running the merchandise business. And that becomes, an entire business entity. And then, the other major one within there would be recorded music, which starts with, going to the studio and making records and then managing the marketing and rollout of those records.
Seems like a lot. So after
Yeah, can be.
after working for 6 years with the merged companies, you mentioned before you didn't think it was working out as well as it could have, and you decided to relaunch Force Media Management as a separate company. Why did you choose to separate the two, and when did you ultimately decide to do this?
Well, it's based on contracts and years of a contract. So since the show's talking about business, I'll dive in a little bit deeper.
Yeah,
I did a 3-year deal with Red Light Management initially, and there were really deep sunset clauses in my contract. And for those listeners who don't know what a sunset clause is, it means for every year that you're under that contract, you're paying that person that you're in business with for a certain amount of years after the contract. And I was there for 3 years. And while I didn't hate it, there were things where I felt like it didn't live up to what I wished it would. And if I were to leave at that point in time, I would have had to pay my former partner for for 6 more years. I think they would have earned a portion of my income. And I didn't want to pay them out sunset clauses for an extended period of years. So I agreed to a 3-year amendment to my contract where I stuck around for another 3 years, but at the end of those 3 years, I didn't have to pay them a dime in sunset clauses. So my motivation to stay for the last 3 was if the relationship gets better, we could re-up a new contract and figure out how to structure that at that point in time. But if they didn't live up to what they told me they would fix that I was unhappy with, I wasn't beholden to them to pay them anything moving forward.
Okay. So let's talk about your experience managing bands in the global pandemic. When the coronavirus first broke out in March, what were your first thoughts in terms of your clients, in terms of your job as an artist manager?
It was definitely, fear, terror, concern, all of those things combined. And for the first time ever in my career, I reached out to my artists and said, I don't know what's going to happen. This was early on. This was before, tours were canceled, before we were fully long-term shut down. And I just reached out and said, prepare to not have money. You guys make your living from this band. Look at other ways to make money and do it fast, because I think this thing is going to last a while. And that was my initial vibe: is we're screwed. I don't know when we're all going to make money again, and we should prepare for the worst case scenario. And that was just kind of like that initial instinct and reaction to it all.
And then going along with that, where almost every facet of the music industry took a hit once entering the pandemic, your work with Underoath, where you reimagined live streaming, actually covered some of the losses that the band would have faced from the absence of touring. What was the Underoath Observatory, and how did it differ from regular live streaming?
Okay, so the Underoath Observatory was a brand we created around their live streams. And basically, what we saw is artists are starting to do these live streams, and a lot of them were from their house. And if they weren't from their house, they went to, an empty venue or rehearsal studio. And it was basically replicating what a live show is. And there's pros and cons to this replicating a live show. You see the band on stage, you see empty room and wall behind them. That is what a live show looks like, minus the people. But you lose kind of some of the emotion of what a live show is in just such a sterile environment. So our first goal in creating the Underoath Observatory was to create an immersive experience where both the band and the fan would feel a lot more involved in the experience. So we created a circular stage where the band were all facing inwards, looking at each other within this circle. So instead of playing to an empty room, they were playing to each other and able to feed off of each other. And then we set up cameras within that circle. We had like different quadrants within that circle with cameras mounted within that area so that you can capture that environment in a different way and allow the fan to really feel like they were in that circle with the band. And then we also came up with some interesting camera angles. Like one of those camera angles was shooting them from above and looking down on them within that circle. So a lot of this was just about reimagining what this can look and feel like to be more compelling content. And then on top of that, rather than just simply doing a stream, we kind of went back to some old ideas we had in the past. And most artists, they have ideas of tours they may do in the future that they haven't done yet, whether it be, an anniversary tour or playing, a certain type of tour. Maybe you'll do an acoustic tour or, just different ideas. And one of the ideas that Underoath and I had been sitting on was this idea to go out and play their 3 biggest albums in their entirety over 3 nights in clubs. So kind of like take over a town for a week rather than just simply playing one show. And part of the idea we had with this was if we were going to do this, to re-release each of those albums on vinyl and then do merch drops built around each of those albums as well. So we had this idea that we've been sitting on for a while, and we said, let's take that idea and merge it with live streaming. And that makes the stream that much more compelling because it's content that fans are going to be that much more excited about. So that kind of gives you an overview of how we got to, where we were with it.
And wasn't it done like in a backyard in Tampa? Was it the band members' yard? It wasn't like
It actually wasn't a yard, but it was a warehouse. It was literally just a warehouse where we set up and just made it happen. Like we didn't do it on a stage. It wasn't a venue. It had nothing to do with where music would normally be presented, but it just worked and it looked unbelievable and it sounded great. Like it was just a unique way to do it. And thankfully it all worked out as we hoped it would.
I think live streaming specifically, it's really cool that you got to do something else with it because in the beginning of the pandemic, it was so oversaturated, in my opinion. There was live stream after live stream after live stream. And for like the first week, I would tune into my favorite artists. But after the second week, I got to be honest, I was not clicking on every single week. So something different for the band must have been exciting for their fans.
Yeah, it was. It was exciting for the band as well as their fans. I mean, we've done a lot of different projects for this band over their career, and everyone felt like it was the most rewarding project that they did over their entire career because we took something where they had a summer tour that was canceled due to COVID, and financially we made more money than we would have made from the tour. But being a musician, money is important, but it's usually not the biggest motivation. The biggest motivator to them that they were most excited about was just the fact that they created something new. Everyone who saw it, just like their mind was blown and they couldn't believe that there was a new way to look at presenting a live stream. And, people still are talking about it. An article came out this week in a music magazine again, talking about what they did. And like that was just so exciting for them to be at the forefront of creating a new way of doing something that lots of people were doing. And, the bands had a lot of friends who came to them and said, we didn't think we could do a live stream. We didn't think it was right. But after seeing yours, we decided to do one, and we made enough money to pay our bills for the year. So it's just rewarding to not only be, creative leaders, but also allow that creativity to help their friends then, grow their own business and take care of themselves in, these scary times.
For sure, that much more rewarding, especially during the scariest time in the music industry. So you've
Oh
stated,
yeah.
yeah. So you stated that social media marketing is one of your strong suits. How involved does a manager need to be in a band's personal social account? I think we talked about before that you gain access to all your band's social media. Is that the case with every artist manager?
It depends. And I've been on projects where I don't have access, and some of my artists I have access to some socials, but not others. And to me, the manager having access it's important just to help in emergency situations, but it's really almost like a worst case scenario having access to social media, because you want the artists to create dynamic, engaging content that's real. A manager shouldn't be faking it. A manager should understand the platform, know how it works, perhaps know all the newest things that are going on with that platform. Like, for instance, a great example would be Instagram launched shopping right around the time we launched the Underoath stream. So while I wanted the band to share on their socials often, talking about either the live stream or other things that they have going on, I'm the one who knows that they should integrate shopping into it. And it's not their job to know that you can add these new tools in, but it is their job to create content and be real with their fans. So that's where it really comes in handy to have, a manager who's tied into those things, because it's just knowing how to utilize the tool, but then you need to give that tool to the artist to use it.
Awesome. So we covered a lot of artist management basics today, but what biggest piece of advice would you give to a young entrepreneur who's looking to start a career in artist management?
Whew, I don't know. It's such a difficult business, but it's study, learn from the past, but also forge your own path. And one of the biggest things I tell people is just be honest. Like, telling artists what they need to hear is so much more important than telling them what they want to hear. And I did a session last week with one of my artists where we did this mentorship session where my artist and I interviewed each other. And one of the most important things that the artist said is he feels like his career has been more successful because I'll tell him when he's doing something wrong. And I'm not afraid to say no. And a lot of managers are afraid to say no. And it can be both damaging professionally and personally for artists to be yes all the time. And, you see it with small acts where like they may never get there in their career before it, but you also see, on a bigger picture, you look at like the Michael Jacksons of the world and other like massive superstars who have surrounded themselves by yes people, and everybody's afraid of getting fired. So nobody will tell them when they're doing something wrong that can personally harm them or harm their career. So if you build an environment where you're comfortable saying no in the beginning, the artist learns that no is okay and can have a much better both career and life because of it.
Was it always comfortable for you to say no in the beginning? Did you find that difficult when you first started managing bands?
Yes and no. It depends on the scenario. Like, there's definitely some difficulty, but quite often, if you just know that you're right, and and sometimes you're wrong too, and it's the artist's job to listen. And the most important thing with saying no isn't stopping someone from doing it. It's letting them know that they may be making a mistake and letting them look at it differently. And in telling them no, they may give a reason why they're right and you agree with them. And just having that comfort level. And some of it is, was I more nervous to say it earlier in my career? Sure, but it's how you say it, and like maybe you don't say no, you say, but what about this? And throw out alternatives. And quite often, people are open to the alternative. They just have only looked at it one way. And it's important to just bring opposing views into a conversation.
So there's definitely a way to go about it when you're saying these no.
Exactly. And it's interesting. Different artists have different ways to talk to them. And like this one artist that I did this mentorship session with the other day that we broadcasted, for whatever reason, I have to almost be like nasty to him. And I don't like it. Where I'm just like, shut up. You're being an idiot. Like I literally talk to him like that, but that's how I don't want to say he wants me to talk to him, but that's how he finally listens and he respects it. And like, even in this forum where we're talking to other people about it, like he was like, this is what Randy has to do to me to get me to pay attention. And he appreciates it. So it's like, I don't like to have to talk to people like that, but sometimes that's what works.
That's interesting. He likes to be called an idiot.
Yeah, it's weird. And like, this specific artist, like I've noticed in his personal life too, like he doesn't pay attention into those people that care about him, kind of shake him and go, stop. And like, I've seen it with his own family too. And it's just, different people like operate different ways. And like, it doesn't make him a bad person or wrong. And it's something that I've told other people who are in business with him, that you need to really like shake him to get him to listen. And he's not going to get the like loose kind of like, hey, why don't you try this? Like, not going to work. Mm-hmm. And, the most important thing out of all of that, though, is as a manager, you have to respect the decision the artist made if you disagree with it, and stand behind them afterwards. And you don't rub it in if they were wrong. They know they were wrong and they'll accept it. And it's just like, you have to find that right path to get there. And when you do, like your job is, they're your boss. So at the end of the day, it's fine. Like you have to stand behind them. And if they made a bad decision, they may not admit they made it, but their actions and their behavior will state that. And you have to just help them clean up the mess afterwards. You don't step back and go, I told you were going to screw this up. You go, all right, let's figure out what's next. Let's figure out how to get where we got to go.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for all the basics you've been giving us. We're just about wrapped up today. So Randy, where can our listeners keep up with you and Force Media Management online?
Yeah, best ways to keep up with me would be to follow me on LinkedIn, where I try to share interesting stories around the music business. And I believe my LinkedIn is just LinkedIn/Randy Nichols, but you can search me and find me pretty easily there. And I try to share stories on Twitter as well. I'm less engaged on Twitter than I should be, but LinkedIn, is really the spot to find me.
Great. Well, thank you so much to Randy Nichols for coming on to the show today, founder and president of Force Media Management. Make sure to keep up with Randy on all social platforms, as well as at WRHU Music on Instagram and Twitter for more music shows, interviews, and updates. For Music Biz Buzz on 88.7 FM Radio Hofstra University, I'm your host, Katie Egan.